Hi guys, so today we've got speaking Gordon Benton and Janet Benton. Those who don't know, that's my dad and that's my sister. My dad's an architect, turned urban planner, done a lot of stuff in Asia, actually all over the place. I don't actually know what you're going to be talking about today, but I think it's more Eastern stuff, isn't it? And Janet's a landscape architect who is working in Scotland at the moment on a couple of future projects. So yeah, there we go.
Thanks, Katrina. Hello. First of all, thanks very much for asking us to come along and talk to you. Delighted to be here. How many of you are landscape architects? You all landscape architects? Any architects? Okay, good. All right. As Katrina said, my father's experience is mostly in the Far East. He's also worked in Iran, Pakistan, Malaysia, Borneo, Indonesia, Korea. So he's going to talk this evening about sustainable settlement in that context. My experience has been mostly in the UK, in certainly one half of my degree, and I've worked mostly in urban design, so I've always been sort of drawn to the larger scale and more strategic projects. So I'm going to talk tonight about similar sort of experience, but from this country's perspective. Obviously, there's a massive difference between what we see in the East and what we see in the West. These are driven by similar...
Sorry, can we put this?
Of course, there's a huge need in both contexts for additional development, for additional housing, driven by slightly different things. And also, of course, inevitably the design of new development is driven by different design parameters. So the two talks are going to be to some degree convergent and some degree divergent. We're not going to go into that in a lot of detail just because we haven't got the time this evening. But through the progress of the two talks, you'll be able to draw your own conclusions about that. But certainly that would be an interesting topic for discussion after the presentation. But suffice to say, if you put sustainable development and South Korea, for example, into Google, you get an image something like this. If you put sustainable settlement and the UK into Google, you get an image like you see below. So clearly, you know, we are talking about different scales, different aspirations, different sort of objectives, different drivers of design, and that essentially is the theme that's going to run through these two talks. And without further ado, I should pass over to Gordon.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much for inviting us to talk to you. We've put together just a few pictures to catch your imagination and perhaps give you some opportunity to discuss the different points of view. Working in Europe and working in Britain specifically, and working in these very high population areas like China, Indonesia, even Korea and so on, they have a different approach to housing. They have to have. I think we've got to, in Europe, we've got to go that way in some form or another in the very near future, because we cannot expand our cities forever, and we have to start going vertical. So this is a project which we did, a new town, what we call an edge city. It's about 30 kilometers outside Jakarta, and in 7 years we built a population of 50,000, that's 10,000 homes, and I had, interestingly, about 67,000 jobs. That's what new towns are about, not just housing people, but giving people jobs. Let's see where my keys are here. Yeah, this is the sort of things that's happening in Asia. They are lacking in humanity, but they have massive problems in rehousing their populations. Lifting the populations from low to low middle class to middle class. A country like Indonesia has twice the middle class that we have in the UK. In China, the population is about 5-6 times the middle class that we have here. It's the middle class that drives the growth of cities, not the poor, not the rich. The rich create their own laws. They push money out of the countries, they don't pay tax. The poor are, the government has to look after them everywhere. It's the middle class that actually drives the economies of these cities. This is one of our cities here where we started to build high-rise in the centre because we were spreading out too far. Infrastructure was costing far too much. And by concentrating the development of a hotel, a hospital, an office block, and so on, a bank and a mall, we could we could limit the cost of our infrastructure. This is the sort of things that's going off in the Arab countries. These are actually 4-story, a lot of them made of very simple materials like mud and so on, but they're very, very dense populations. This is Australia. This is totally man-made. The lake, the ground form, everything is man-made. And the environment is calm and less intense, less dense and rather glamorous, I have to say. This is the same river, not river, lake, and they've actually made a swimming pool out of it as well. So the whole thing is planted out and it's a very high recreational amenity in the middle of low-rise housing. But that's Australia. So that was the green places, and we have grey places. This is South Africa, where a car park is built like this. It's very unusual, but I thought quite an interesting pattern, a bit boring, but of course quite interesting. In Korea, you have these extraordinary autumn colours, which they develop. They plant out in very dense forest areas, amazing amount of forests here. And I think this is something we could do in Scotland, really. And we're doing this in Descalia, is it? Descalia, trying to get the colour out of these wonderful colours that we have in nature. This is indoor. This is the Singapore airport, would you believe? I mean, the whole thing is totally growing, green. Everywhere you look at the airport, it's an absolutely magnificent tropical landscape that they've created inside there. So it's a lovely little place to rest into. Now, many people are talking about going away from oil and going into sustainability and the windmills and all this sort of argument going on. But whatever we are doing, and we're moving into sustainables, and I think this is very good. We've got to invest, we have to inject capital and so on and so on. But the big question is, are we going to move away from carbons? We have 3.5 million oil rigs operating today. Are we going to close them anytime soon? 20 years, 30 years? 1 million petrol stations all around the world. Are we going to close them? Are we going to change our cars? Is that real? Can we actually get away from carbon fuels in the next 50 years? No, we will not. This is going to be a major part of our economy and major part of the fuel base on which we've got to build our cities. So that's cars, and so on and so on and so on. So on. So this of course this is a disaster. But you have to compare this in your landscape with transmission pylons, with factory chimneys everywhere we used to have, farmers' silos, and Dutch windmills. Everybody says, oh, aren't they beautiful? They are wind turbines, but they have a romantic image to them. And the urban signage, is this the sort of thing that we want in our landscape? Cars are congested. The congestion of cars. What are we going to do about moving people as an alternative cars? Cars take you from your door to your place of work, to your place of recreation. Have we anything that approaches that? Certainly not the Edinburgh trams, I would suggest. We, in a place like Jakarta, and we can repeat this in Seoul, we can repeat this in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Calcutta, in the big cities in the world. 350 new cars are coming onto the street every day. 1,300 motorcycles every day. That's about 15% increase in traffic every year, with only a 0.05% increase in roads. So if it's congested today, tomorrow it will be worse. So what are we going to do with all this? The motorcycle actually takes people, it's a taxi, takes people from the door to the mall, waits for you, takes you all the way back to your house. No bus does that, no tram does that, no train does that, and cars don't do that either. But motorcycles, in good weather, in non-icy weather, is a huge vehicle. And of course it's all over the place. How do we control this? You can do 7-lane highways, whatever. It's very, very difficult to control, and so on. So what are we going to do about the pedestrian? Because there is one reality, is that nobody spends money sitting in a car. You have to get out of your car to shop, to go to the cinema, to eat, to go to, and you've got to get out of your car. So to get out of your car, you have to have sidewalk or pavement design. So here it says, run like hell to cross the road, and believe me, that's what you have to do where traffic is of this sort of density. Now, what we're trying to say in our urban development is the cities can't expand forever, like amoeba, because the cost of infrastructure, pipes, sewage, gas, broadband, potable water, and so on, just cost more and more money as you stretch further and further out of these towns. So we try and say, put a red line around these cities and try and create outside Edinburgh, outside Aberdeen, outside Glasgow, viable cities, each with their own job. This one would be a tourist job, this would be a fishing job, this would be agriculture, this would be high-tech research, and then the communication here is not today by vehicle, but by handphone. The handphone is transforming our whole concept of urban planning. Now this concept started off with a chap called Patrick Geddes, a Scottish guy, and he went to France, educated them, taught them this sort of concept, and then this was actually built by, what was his name? Ebenezer Howard. He put this up, but this is the encapsulate how we want to, we have to think of our new cities. They cannot expand further. Sorry. Sorry. So, in our design of cities and design of man-made implant onto our environment, do we go for grid lines, or do we go for flowing grid lines, or do we go for straight square like American street? We prefer the flow. That previous picture actually is man-made. It's rice fields in Indonesia, it can be in the Philippines, it can be in China, it can be in Thailand. These are all man-made, they are magnificent, they are 1,000 years old, and they sort of embody the culture of these countries where straight lines are a bit of an anathema. We try and get everything to flow. So our towns all try and flow, go with the flow. Now, we ask the children to decide what does a street mean to them. Now, it's very interesting because we never ask the children, do we? We ask the politicians, we ask the planners, we ask the landscape architects and so on. But have you asked the child, what does a street mean to them? A street means to them, kids smoking or mucking about here, having a bit of a fight. Rubbish over here, chewing gum here, cars parked all over the place, a bit of football in the middle, and so on and so on. So that's how they see a street. Is that right or not? I think you'll find that we don't design for children. Streets can be treated in many, many ways. You can have parking down both sides like in Edinburgh, you can close them off like we do somewhere, or you can do just emphasize that the pedestrian has priority and parking has very limited. Now what we did in Indonesia is something quite different. It's what we call traffic calming, and instead of a straight line like that, we curved the road. We curved the road. Every 100 meters we curved the road, and we landscaped there, no fences to the houses, so it was rather beautiful, and it slowed down the traffic, and the kids could play everywhere because it was totally safe. I should have a drawing of that, but I couldn't quite get it in there. Where are we? Hey. Yeah, now what happens with green spaces? This is a normal solution. Pocket handkerchief, little spaces, round the back, here, there, a little bit, people do a little bit of allotments in here and here. But what we're trying to say is there should be connectivity between the green spaces. The green spaces should all be connected up, across, down, so that people can walk in safe and comfort without wheels and traffic knocking them over. They're safer, well lit, nice green paths and so on. So if you look at your plans, you look at Edinburgh, you look at all these, got little squares and this, the next thing, none of them accessible. They've got fences around them. Keep this belongs to me, this belongs to somebody else, it doesn't belong to you. You can't take your dogs in there, So, but this sort of area, you can walk your dogs, and it connects, it brings the community together. in places like Bali and places, less developed part of the world, let us say, the streets are a great event. You know, they plant trees just where where they can, because they want to try and prioritize for pedestrians. And there's always green. Everywhere there's green. But you look at Princess Street, you look at George Street in Edinburgh, you look at Union Street in Aberdeen, you look at these streets, there's no trees anywhere. And we think that is missing in the beauty of streets, relying totally on granite, sandstone, whatever it is, and asphalt, and a little bit of expensive pavement. We think that this spontaneity is how we would like to see our landscape, so that people feel that it's human scale. And the other thing is to realize that 95% of all buildings in the world are not built by architects. Realize that. That is a really important thing to consider. See, our streets, we're trying to think of streets that are suitable for pedestrians. We can get a taxi down there, we can get a taxi to pass a motorcycle there, and we can get people to walk up and down. That is how we like to think, that the pedestrian is the priority, and the car travels at the speed of a pedestrian. In your row streets and so on, when a vehicle goes in there, or if you have streets like in Seoul and so on, which are pedestrianized, people walk, the traffic travels at the pace of people, so that people can then get out of the cars and shop. Otherwise the shops don't work. Yeah, you know, sidewalks can take very far. This is a sidewalk in Swaziland, I think it's South Africa somewhere. And it doesn't need to be hazardous, it doesn't need to be dangerous. It can have lots of colour and lots of vitality, and you don't need animal crap or people spitting out chewing gum and all the rest of it as we get in our civilization here. Singapore, they don't allow chewing gum, and the reason for that is they don't like chewing gum on their streets, and they don't like chewing gum jamming up their MRT systems and so on. So they just banned it, and you know, it's beautiful. When you go to Aberdeen, it's filthy, ridiculous, you know, really, really filthy. We don't need that. We need pride in our environment. And I think if we start to think in terms of a rather more beautiful environment, I think people will respond by looking at it. You see, a place like Hong Kong, really, really dirty place. They built the MRT, it is pristine because the people are proud of it. Same in Singapore, the people are so proud of their underground railway system. But we look at our streets and they're pretty sordid stuff. When we're looking at experiences going along our sidewalks and so on, we try and get some interest and excitement as we go along. It shouldn't be just a straight, uninteresting exercise of progression. This is a little interesting house here. This is a low-cost house, about 36 square meters on 70 square meters of land. And in our towns that we built, this is the lowest income house. It's called a core house, and then behind they can build another 35 square meters, and then they can build 35 square meters at the back. They cannot touch the front. But the interesting thing is that these people here, with such a small piece of land, actually won the Garden of the Year when we had all these beautiful, expensive gardens and so on. But these people with their epiphytes and so on, and how they built their garden, we were hopeful that people could really love their gardens, however small they were. And this is Foster, you know, he's a famous architect. This is the sort of streets that are British architect designs. A little bit of green, a little bit of tin, slightly. But to me, well, Foster, you have to think that he's good, but you know, I don't know if it's all that great. Now, what we try and do with our towns is a lot of it is to do with management. We have to manage our towns. Because at the present moment, councils manage them, they make ridiculous decisions, but this is professionalised management. High-rise building has got a building manager, low-rise towns have a town manager. And I created this concept. And where we ran the infrastructure, the environment, community affairs, and land bank, and security, and all the various things, and income, rent, and rates, and ran our own police and everything. and it worked fantastically well, because the government are not capable of doing it up to the standard we needed. We recycle all our waste, our solid waste, recycle our water waste for irrigation and recharging the aquifer, and we have 100% self-sustainability in this. We have different types of transport, all sorts of different types of transport: private cars, radial buses, intercity buses, motorcycles, mopeds, cycles, MRP, and even helicopters. And everybody thinks, Indonesia is an underdeveloped country. We evacuate trauma accidents off the tolls to our hospital in our own helicopters. And then, dealing with flooding and so on. We have flooding in this country. Today in the south of England, you'll get all in the news tonight at 6 o'clock about flooding. Because we don't understand that flooding is a matter of designing a flood retention capacity. If you're starting to develop over floodplains with golf courses and close off the rivers that used to flood there, then you're going to get flood somewhere else. So what we did here is that this is a river here, and this used to be rice fields. You still see the rice fields here. And there's a stream goes down here. And we built this football pitch. And I built it low. They wanted to build it high to be dry, and I said, no, you've got to keep it low, and when it floods, it will flood right across. And it floods right here. And the boss got really angry, and I said, well, if you don't flood here, you're going to flood the villages, and you're going to flood your offices downtown, where you have $20 million worth of computer equipment. Better flood here. And of course, it's very good for the football pitch. So, when we're designing cities, at the bottom of the hill we have football pitches or golf courses or playgrounds and so on. Nobody is playing golf, except maybe some Koreans or so, but generally nobody's playing golf during the floods, the rains. So we'll allow these places to flood so that the rest of the place. See, this is a win-win-win. This is the town that we have here. This is the golf course all the way around, and the whole town, 1,000 hectares, drains into this here. That there is what you would do by digging down here, and you'll find water. And we took 3 million cube out of here to get this water, which goes up and down with the rainfall, but it's natural water. All the flood water comes in here, and if it floods a bit of golf, who cares? We have an island here which eventually will be apartments and so on. At the present moment we have big events like the Highland Gathering, which is that sort of stuff. So we have a sensitivity about different styles of architecture. This is a bit of an area where we have 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom and so on. And we have nice little enclaves, secure enclaves, which is sort of endemic in the Philippines and Indonesia, Singapore and so on. So thank you very much. I'll hand you over to Janet, who will take that on and so on. I don't know if I did that. Just a minute.
There are some synergies, obviously, between what my father's been talking about, what we're talking about, but of course the key drivers of change in UK are a little bit different from what we're seeing in Asia. The key problem that we have is that 86% of people in the UK live in detached, semi-detached or terraced housing in areas like this, which you can call housing, but really don't qualify as communities. This is very isolating in terms of community. Everyone drives around by car. To go to a shop, you need to get into a vehicle. You tend to find that your facilities and amenities are isolated from your housing areas. It's very antisocial for children, and so on and so forth. So the erosion of social cohesion is one of the key factors that is causing concern for us at the moment. And it is a reaction to this sort of typical, I was going to say traditional, I mean it's almost become traditional, this kind of tract suburban housing in UK. But it's a reaction to this sort of layout that has stimulated Scottish Government and my two clients particularly to try and find a different approach to master planning. The two projects I'm going to refer to today are both up in Aberdeen. There's Chapelton, which is about 20 minutes south of Aberdeen, and Granham, which is on the periphery of the city itself. And both of these are pieces of land are owned by private landowners who have been involved in the past in that more conventional way of doing housing and are both extremely dissatisfied with it. They don't like what has been achieved and they're desperate to find something else. The Scottish Government, over the last few years, you may be aware, has become interested in other ways of structuring master plans and trying to find better ways of delivering proper mixed use, mixed tenure, more diverse development that is more supportive of traditional communities. So at Granham we have a site which is going to take possibly up to 7,000 units, houses, and Chapelton's a little bit higher than that, maybe 8,000 or 9,000 units. So to give you a scale reference, that's bigger than St Andrews. So these are really, really huge projects, and it is just not appropriate really to talk about it in terms of housing. I mean, these have to be settlements, they have to be integrated settlements, and a lot more than housing. The source of this other approach to master planning has turned out to be a company called DPZ, who some of you may have come across before, Dwayne Plater Zyberg, who are based in, well, they've got their headquarters in Miami, and they have a particular method which the Scottish Government and so on have become aware of, and they were invited to come and work coincidentally on these two projects. They're doing other projects in the UK too, but as it turned out they were involved in both these projects. So myself as a landscape architect got involved in both these projects right from the start. So we did the initial site evaluation for the Americans who came to UK, and we have worked through, as you see over the last 3 years, we've worked through all the different stages. We have been integral to the master plan team. We have worked with the other technical specialists on the laying out of configuring the spaces and streets and so on, all the technical stuff to do with drainage and energy and so on and so forth. And both schemes will be submitted for planning permission in principle. And Chapelton, slightly further ahead, we've got detailed planning consent for the first phase on Chapelton. In fact, we started on site about 2 weeks ago, so that's very exciting. And Granham's a little bit behind that, but following the very similar trajectory. So here, for example, is Chapelton. This is our absolutely wonderful site, Chapelton. Beautiful site. It is agriculture, as you can see, and although it looks very idyllic on this sort of day, I can tell you that it's not an easy bit of farmland to farm. I think I might have felt a lot more uneasy about developing this land if it wasn't for the fact that the farm manager said to me, "Trust me, Janet, if you were asked to look at this land afresh today, the last thing you would do with it is farm it." So the idea of developing it is not perhaps the worst thing that could happen, given that in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, the councils are committed to delivering 17,000 houses between now and 2030. So there's a massive demand, has to be put somewhere. And this site actually particularly lends itself very well, I think. So I had spent one of the best weeks of my career, I think, walking every inch of this site. I didn't quite realise how big it was, actually, to be truthful. So I walked every inch, and by the time the Americans were due to come to UK to start the project, I had become rather passionate about it, and I had decided that the last thing they were going to do was arrive as strangers and start, you know, just getting stuck in and tearing stuff apart. So I decided that I would do an evaluation document, if you like, a site appreciation document. And, you know, I knew they could get hold of all the factual stuff, all the objective data was kind of reasonably easy to come by, you know, the designations and all that sort of thing. It was pretty easy. But what I wanted them to feel was the sort of special properties of the site, the more subtle aspects of the site, the bits of the landscape that were really kind of delicate and just beautiful, and they really shouldn't go near. And, you know, the sunny bits of the site, and the bits where you suddenly got the glimpse of the sea. You know, it was much more subjective and much more essential kind of analysis. And we explained it in a whole variety of different ways. And I was pretty fortunate when we first all got together, and none of us had ever met each other before. Andrew Delaney, who's the senior partner in that project, said, "Right, you know, all right, everyone stop, we're going to listen to Janet." So I was actually given an opportunity to present all this, and I think because I had been involved in master planning myself, I had tailored it very much to what I knew the master planners would need to know. So I was kind of fortunate, really, that we shared a common language. I think that's probably the easy way to say it. I was saying to Andres things like, well, this bit here is just really stunning, and you know, that's where you can put some of your prime properties and so on. And because we were talking a similar language, it kind of had some, it was really quite effective, and that was very pleasurable. I have to say that in practice they're very landscape aware. I mean, they're not like a lot of architects I've worked with who sometimes don't make that their starting point. DPZ do make that their starting point. So they arrived, and the first thing we did was everybody in a room on site for 8 days. And this is integral to DPZ's technique. The DPZ master plan team are all sitting around the edge of the room at tables. In the middle is a discussion table, and periodically through the 8 days, invited people come to join in discussions on specific topics. So you might have a workshop about highways design or energy or environment or whatever. Invited people come from the councils and so on, decision makers come. The public are invited to attend at any point. They can come at any time they like. Local residents come. And it's an extremely open and transparent process. And the master plan team are drawing. They just sit down straight away and draw. They don't wait for anything. They just sit down and they just start drawing. And you might start with 3 concepts. You might have 3 teams doing 3 concepts. And local architects and people like myself join in any way you want to. You can just join in. And there's a sort of cross-fertilization. The discussions that are happening in the specialist discussion groups are being listened to by the architects, and it goes back and forth. So it's extremely dynamic, extremely iterative, and a very, very interesting process. If you ever get a chance to witness one of these or be involved, jump at it. It means that if there are any problems, any issues, any concerns people have, they are addressed there and then. In the case of Chamberlain, we had a local resident who said, who was in a terrible state, I mean a really, really terrible state. I thought this person was going to have a heart attack actually. But we addressed their problem by a group of 4 or 5 of us all went out in the Land Rover and went to site, stood in his kitchen, looked out his window, and he said, I bought this house because I wanted this view, and you're going to just spoil it all. And Andrea said, well, we don't have to spoil it. How far away would you find it acceptable of houses? And the residents said, well, I need a field. I really would like a field. If you start beyond that field, that'd be great. And actually, that was within our gift to give, as it turned out. So, I'm painting it as being very idealized. It's not. There's a lot of hard work has to be done. There's a lot of persuasion. But we're exposing the why as well as the what. And that is incredibly potent, I can't tell you. It's very, very interesting. So DPZ are pioneers in the field of new urbanism, which is a movement that started in the States. They have built 300 communities. And I think what's interesting about what they do is they have developed a philosophy based on academic research and practice. They're part of a group who've developed these ideas communally. So they're all feeding in, they're all testing each other's, they all discuss and criticize each other's work. That is, again, another extremely interesting kind of, it doesn't happen in the UK much, we're all too busy competing with one another. And out of that has come something which I think is incredibly interesting. Personally, I think it's very robust. Definitely worth you all reading about and seeing what you think about it. Their philosophy is based on what they call transit-based planning, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the principles are called urbanism, which again I'll explain in a bit. And they use charrettes as a really fundamental element of what they do, because it means that stakeholders and decision makers are involved in the process, and makes it incredibly fast. 3 years from start to finish, or from start of the process to being on site at Hamilton is, extremely unlikely. It wouldn't have happened without the charrette. So they're inspired by Patrick Geddes, who, how many people have heard of Patrick Geddes? Hooray. Also really worth reading about, just because he's got a brain the size of the planet. It's quite extraordinary. Really, he's a polymath, and I think that's what's interesting. For landscape architects particularly, we are generalists. And when you read the stuff of Patrick Geddes, who was a scientist, he was a planner, he was a sociologist, it's so empowering. It really makes you feel like you could make a difference. And as you'll be aware of his transit section, that he is sort of idealized regional to urban section. But of course, this was not supposed to be a report on an existing condition. This was supposed to influence people to think about context, the importance of context, the importance of doing things that are thoughtful and appropriate. And that has influenced DPZ, and of course they produced their own translate. How many of you have seen this before? No? Good, all right. So this is a response to what's happening in America with suburban sprawl. and they have developed their own transact. And this is a structured way of looking at things. 20th century planning is very much focused on activities and uses. You know, we're all zoned, aren't we? In the British planning system particularly. And what this is saying is that is not enough. We've also got to build in degree of development, so density, for example, and typology. So instead of doing one thing everywhere, we should be doing lots of different things, and they need to be appropriate. So, but of course, the transact is a static thing, and as in ecology, and transacts that you get in ecology, transacts are unique, they have to be unique, they're representative. So when the DPZ team came to Aberdeen, the first thing we did is spend 2 days in a bus, driving around streets and towns and all over the place. And every time we stopped, they leapt out and they photographed and they measured and they recorded and they took a note of everything they saw. So they built up a series of typologies of the best places in Aberdeen. It's a quadrat process, those of you who've done life sciences. It's a typical sample of a particular typology. Okay, so you get the section of the street, you get the plan, you get the section, you get the elevation, and then everything is recorded. So this is this empirical method, scientific method, where everything is analysed, observed, recorded, and you end up with your own unique transact for your particular project. And this was the one for Chapelton, which in this case didn't really have a T1 zone, and neither did it have a special district. So the T zones, T1 is rural, T6 is urban, obviously. The denser it is, T6, the more urban it is, the denser it is, the less urban it is, the lower the density. But there's a whole sequence of things that follow on under each one of these transacts, okay? So urbanness is not just about density, obviously, it's about materials, it's about graining, it's about the way you deal with streets. So every element you put into the plan has to conform to the T-zone, okay? So that means where you've got your dense urban core, everything about that treatment in that area is dense. So the way you would do a park there is totally different to the way you would do a park at the edge. So this is layers and layers and layers of stuff. It's quite a lot to talk about. But the movement, the philosophy is based in New Urbanism, and as I say, this is a collective movement in America, and they've developed these principles which they constantly talk about, discuss, and refine, and all the rest of it. And I think it's really, really interesting to use as a set of criteria. In some ways, it's blindingly obvious. I'd like to think it was blindingly obvious to all of us landscape architects. But of course, this is not used as criteria in modern development very often, in fact, hardly at all. So, although this is coming from America and it's about going backwards almost and reclaiming traditional urbanism, it definitely still has some validity today. And we have to talk this language. We have to encourage all the people we work with to use this language if we are to get away from these homogeneous, suburban sprawl type models. So here we are at the end of the charrette. We're all drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing, refining and refining. With a client, by the way, who wants to fix with pencil and the rest of it. And by the end of the charrette, we have a master plan that looks like this. And although, this is DPZ's drawing, and although it looks kind of cartoony, every single plot on that comes with a whole load of other additional information. So these are the layers underpinning that master plan. The 5 minute walking distance is probably the primary structuring device. So everybody is within 5 minutes of a centre which might have a shop and a school, a doctor's surgery or library or something like that. And then 10-minute walking distance to the main town centre and 10-minute walking distance to a bus stop. So we have, these are the neighbourhood centres based on that walking distance. We have all connected up streets, not cul-de-sacs like you see in the more conventional model. There's a bus route that links all that up. We've got open space network, and then we have the T-zones. And for each T-zone, there's a whole raft of design devices that go with that, design elements that go with that. So after the charrette, and I'm going to focus more on the landscape now, we as landscape architects, we did further work on things like this, the landscape concept for the whole settlement, looking at the way we might develop a landscape matrix to provide the connected up corridors that my father was talking about. Looking at natural features, we had to test it against the open space requirements that the council gave us. So many hectares of this for that and all the rest of it. I mean, that's a challenge. That's always fun. But of course, making sure that we do have the right recreational, areas of recreation facilities and the right distributions and so on. Things like existing woodland, we have to develop concepts for how we might improve those and integrate them within the development, and then move into another scale up into phase 1. And by the time we get to phase 1, we're dealing with blocks. Now you can see here, these are fairly traditional looking blocks with perimeter buildings around the perimeters, defining streets. There's no parking in the front curtilage, which is kind of slightly, makes everyone sort of gasp slightly, because that's not the way we like to do it anymore. We're going back to a time when parking was more integrated, and you can see here the gradation: low density, detached, big detached, small detached, becoming more dense, terraced, and all the way up to the centre, where we have flats above shops and so on. So the T zones are playing out in this one. This is a section from T2 up to T5. Okay, and everything, including all my landscape architecture, all my paths and my parks and my whatever, playgrounds and all that shit, all need to fall to place behind this concept. We also have to do infrastructure, suds drainage, which is massive, of course, these days and has all sorts of implications. We work up the blocks even more. We work with designing streets, which those of you who've seen that material will understand that's a very complicated thing to do, trying to change the nature of streets so that they're more human and friendly for pedestrians, less car dominated. We've designed spaces like this Market Square. We've done little parks and green spaces, this one integrating some suds in the middle. Streets, lanes, parking, you know, service vehicles, all the rest of it, all that has to be considered. And we've done all of that with an integrated team. And it even goes as far as to develop a materials palette that we feel will suit the particular locale. So what does all that tell us? That's a bit of a gallop, but really the key things I think we've deduced from all this is that the new urbanism approach, or the transit planning approach, certainly is quite compelling. I mean, for landscape architects, it makes a huge amount of sense because we're dealing with context and we're dealing with spatial issues which respond very well. So I think it's very compelling. I think it's very, very interesting having a structured way of master planning that the whole team sign up to. Okay, so your engineers, your energy consultants, your architects, everybody, it becomes the foundation that holds the whole thing up. Everything is measured against it. If it works, so we go with it. So I think it's a very, very interesting model. There will be others. I mean, it's not the only one. It's not religion or anything like that, but it is a way of looking at things that's very much to do with appropriateness and authenticity, which I think plays well to landscape architects. Teamwork is everything in master planning. I mean, if you're the kind of person that wants to sit in the garret and design things all by yourself, then master planning isn't going to be for you because you spend your life arguing with everybody about everything. But one of the other key lessons I've really learned about master planning is you just forget professional boundaries. Do not, try and keep your spaces to yourself as a landscape architect. What you've got to do is you've got to have something to say about what they're doing. Whether it's the roads engineer or the drainage guy or whatever, you have something to say about his, and be prepared for him to have to say something about your stuff. And that is the way. That's absolutely the way. No professional egos. That's incredibly useful. Secondly, it's about urbanism. It's not about architecture. This whole conversation gets hijacked about the style of the buildings. If these places are to be successful as places, as towns, as communities, it's not about the architectural style. That really does not matter. It's the urbanism that matters. And separating these two things is very crucial. Every time I give this talk, the discussion afterwards is always about the style of the architecture. It's not really helpful. With 9,000 houses to build, there's no way in a million years we're going to build them all in one style. The images we have at the minute are traditional. That's what our client wants to do. That's what the market is telling him will sell. There's no way that's going to be forever. There's going to be some really contemporary stuff too. The point is, it's the urbanism that holds it all together. Legacy. Thinking long term. Our clients are willing to pay a premium for a new approach. They're willing to wait. Because they're landowners, they think long term anyway, actually. And again, for landscape architects, that's fantastic because they're quite happy to plant small things and let them grow and try things, and we'll modify things as we go. They're very practical people, and in the case of Chapelton, the landowner is setting up a management company to manage the development once residents start to arrive and so on. So he's really thinking long. He's not even thinking about his lifetime. And that, again, makes us a little different from normal developer models, and it's key. Genius loci, as we know, incredibly important. The fact that the architects on this scheme were very empathetic and sympathetic to landscape and decided that the scheme was going to lie completely gently on the land. They would keep every landscape feature they could. Every stone wall, every tree, every hedge, everything was to remain unless it really couldn't remain. That's had an enormous number of challenges because things like gradients, it's very difficult to develop on steep gradients these days, and so on. But that has been, I think it means that the character and the identity of development comes through automatically, and it's certainly very, very gratifying from our point of view. Last but not least, standards. We have learned that the standards, the parking standards, you know, what you can and can't do, gradients, road geometries, sustainable drainage, lighting, you name it. They have the most incredible what happens is all these things pop development open. Before you know it, you're back to suburbia. It's incredible, particularly parking standards. You've got to fight these things. And by that I don't mean fight as in go to war, but I mean persuade. We need to do something about the standards. The standards don't let you build traditional spaces that people like and admire. So if you apply the rules, you get this. That's completely compliant. That is just up the road from our development. It is the most joyless and soulless place I think I've been for a very long time. It's ghastly, but that is compliant. And what we're doing is not compliant, even though we're building beautiful parks and spaces and all the rest. So you have to be prepared to, be persuasive. So what we're trying to do is not build smart, ordered, standardized, regularized development. We're trying to build something that's more human, that's a bit more messy, certainly more diverse, certainly more colourful, certainly more human. And that is incredibly hard to do. And it's not actually new urbanism, it's old urbanism for us here in Europe. I didn't think it would be a very hard thing to do. It's an incredibly hard thing to do. So you have to be very persuasive, you have to be very stubborn, you have to be willing to work at it. But I think it's a fantastically interesting and innovative approach. I don't think we will get it right the first time. We're already not getting it right because we can't get permission to do a lot of things we want to do. But I think it's a move away from the soulless suburban development, the model that we see around. So very worthwhile, and we've certainly enjoyed working on it, found it very challenging but very interesting. And we hope that as you guys all graduate, you will join us on this, on these sorts of developments and continue to test them and work out what it is that's going to work and that people really want to find places to live in themselves and join these communities. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions or observations?
Just one question about the transit-based planning that you were talking about.
Yes.
Which was that section was for sort of a land use section of what human beings can do in different areas along. Yes.
Yes.
Do you think that's suitable or addresses ecological aspects as well? Because that's mainly aimed at human activity in different areas.
Yes, it was. I mean, I think that Patrick Davis section has been used and abused by lots of different people for different purposes. And to be honest, I don't know to what degree DPZ have kind of, forensically analysed it, but I think the principle of appropriateness, I think applies, and it would apply to ecology. It applies to everything if you think about it. So I think it's a useful device, but I mean that's really all it is. I think. But it would be interesting to do one for ecology, and I'm sure someone.
Yeah, it's an expression of human activity as such. That was that exercise, but you could do one equally well for environment and its sustainability, the mountain to the sea. I mean, you could do a very interesting one using sort of icons, because at the end of the day, when you are doing creations such as urban settlements, you have to take cognizance of the environment that you're going into. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's just that humans follow the environment or try and follow the environment. We don't often go in there and demolish the environment to put our things in, except in places like Reno, Nevada, you know, Las Vegas, and there. I mean, they've just taken a desert block and they've stuck in a town which has no water, and whereas here you'd be drinking something like about 300 litres per person per day, they with no water consume 890 litres per person per day. They don't have any water, so they have to take it from Colorado. So, and it's the fastest expanding city in America.
Sweet.
Yeah. So they're flying in the face of what we are trying to sell is that there is a place, there's a correct interpretation of space before you start developing. The building on the side of a mountain is totally different if you're sitting on the plains. You know? And as what Janet was showing was that you know, this is good agriculture. This is not good agriculture because she didn't say it. The granite is within about 15 centimeters of the surface. So you have to understand the site, and in that sense, from our point of view, you have to understand the site before you start developing. And that's why you walk around it. That's why you do soil testing. That's why you do surveys before you start, because you have to understand the mechanics of the site. And you have to understand that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, and that the prevailing winds are there. Many people don't believe that the sun rises in the east. And you see buildings everywhere around here, you know, facing, they don't understand that.
But it's true, I mean, it's perfectly sort of self-explanatory to landscape architects. I've learned the hard way that something that's self-evident to you, to the other people in the team.
Maybe it's different in different countries, but it's something that we always put on our drawing. The north point, draw the scale, because nowadays you're on these computers, you take a printout, you don't know what scale it is, so draw the scale. Draw where the sun is, in case people have forgotten. Goes across there, and where the prevailing winds are. How much rain falls, intensity, you know, 58 millimeters in 20 minutes, or whatever it is, intensity. And so that people can design drains and so on and so on. So this is what we try and do at the beginning before we start our projects.
What you were saying about the Scottish Government trying to build communities, and I was thinking about this, and hopefully this is going to become the standard, and people start hating the suburban development. What possibilities do you see for sort of retrofitting character and making streets like the ones you were showing us, and making improvements to existing suburban developments?
That's a fantastic question. I would love some students to do some projects on that. I think that would be amazing. I don't know of anywhere where that's been done. Somebody must have tried it. I mean, I think that is genuinely a fantastically interesting prospect. That one there made me so angry. It's brand new. People are paying £300,000, £400,000, £500,000 for these houses, which it's the most sterile thing. I mean, honestly, it's just desperate. And you can't get your car in the garage. You cannot get a car into any garage in that development. That is a fact. You can get a motorbike, or you can get a very small something. You might get a Fiat 500, but you definitely can't get an average family car in the garage. It's so cynical in terms of its development parameters. It is depressing. So you know, in terms of build quality, the life expectancy is very, very short. I think it's 30 years at the most for a lot of these housing estates. People will continue to expand them and improve them and do things themselves, of course. But I mean, genuinely, these estates will not. They will not hold their value. It's going to be fascinating, and there's just so much of it. You know, you've all seen them all up and down the country. Doesn't matter where you go, they're all the same. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe, I may not use word about it, but you guys will. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that'd be a great
But
project.
Janet doesn't tell you that to do this project here, she's got 40 consultants around her.
130.
130 people working on this. Your modern developer does not pay that sort of money.
Yes. He doesn't employ an architect or a landscape architect or anybody.
His wife will do the job. That's how it's done. Gardening, gardening's fine. You know, easy to do gardening. Who wants a landscape architect? So to interrogate the rules which you have to do. You have to go into, the government says you've got to do roads this meter, interrogate that, because quite often it's totally unnecessary. And you can see, you can drive down from Aberdeen, as we did this morning, so much waste of curbs and sidewalks that nobody goes on, nobody can get on, you know. It's not just in the UK, it's going into the detail, and you need professionals to do it. But the professional has been devalued. You guys have come in to this industry of urban and city manufacturing, making, and it's at an all-time low as far as fees are concerned. When I started 50, 60 years ago, I'd get 7% on my fee for architecture and 10% for a house. Now we're very lucky to get 2. Very lucky to get 2.
The real problem is a client who give you enough fee so that you have enough time to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, there's all of these demands. You've taken 3 years to get to this stage. That is incredibly long for many developers, but in fact incredibly short to get to this extent of detail, because the result will be very interesting, whether in fact it's reflected in profit, reflected in happiness. Certainly it will be reflected in communities, development of communities. Because one of the problems in this sort of development, 20 miles or 15 miles or 10 miles out of a city, is it becomes a dormitory suburb. And people go into town, take an hour and a half to go through nose-to-tail traffic all the way, you know it, you see it here, all the way into town. You have to find parking. Parking costs a lot of money. Jobs are difficult. They have to try and hold their job and so on. They go back home. Still 2 hours or an hour and a half to get back home, and they're exhausted. They sit at home, have a beer, watch television. Can't get the community, don't know their neighbours. Dormitory suburbs are an outcome of amoebic sprawl. So these things here, you'll see that they're neighbourhood shopping, so that people can actually shop here. Now, what people do is they pass Tesco, do the Tesco, free parking there, and so the local village shop doesn't exist, dies. So what you've got to create is well, what are we doing creating communities? We're not creating a shepherd's house up on top of a mountain, we're creating communities largely. And this is what we're talking about today. And what we're talking about is not the architecture, as Janet says, and it's not about the landscape, as Janet says, but it's about the relationship of landscape to building. It's how do you do that relationship? How do these buildings sit in an environment that is community-minded? Can people go with crutches? Can people go with mopeds? Can kids walk safely 600 meters to school? Very, very important things. You know, how do these conurbations work? And I think to analyze how these streets, I mean that street that Janet showed there is absolutely appalling, but totally atypical. It happens everywhere. And that conforms to the rules. So somebody's got to fight. Where I've been working, we create the rules and we ask government approval.
One of the big differences.
I think in China is the same. They've got rules, everybody's got rules, but if you have an idea, and you're taking responsibility for that idea, and you come up with the arguments and so on and so on, get on with it, and you're allowed to get on with it. But here, we are hide-bun by rules.
But in either context, I mean, I really would urge you, it took me far too long to figure this out myself, I really would urge you not to leave behind your common sense. I mean, don't take it as gospel just because someone gives it to you in a book or whatever, but this, you know, don't do this. Ask the obvious question. Why are we doing that? Ask the question, you know, why parking standard? Normal 3-bedroom house, you have 3 parking spaces. You can't include your double garage in that. Not allowed to include a double garage. So if you put a double garage in, you've got to have 5 parking spaces for the house. Now you can think about how that makes your terraces. You can't have 5 parking spaces for a terraced house, can you? You know, think about how wide a house is and how many, you know, how do you do that? So that's why it pops over and pops over. So, you know, we're all saying, ooh, the council says we're going to do this. And, you know, as a group, of course, it's easier. We all start, wait a minute. why? You know, what's that all about? Oh, because people are going to store things in the garages, so that doesn't count for parking. So we said, all right, well, what can we do with the garage to make it somewhere where people aren't going to store things? So actually what we did to make the garage a little bit bigger. So it was a bit of storage in the garage, okay? Or you might make one garage instead of a solid form, you might make it like a carport type of thing. Right? So, you know, but I mean, gosh, it takes a lot of effort and all that stuff, but I'm genuinely, your common sense is just as valuable as anything else. So when you are presenting, whatever the designs, whether it's housing settlements or anything, parks or whatever, don't forget to actually ask why when these things are presented to you.
But when you're presented
be
with a
stroppy, be annoying.
yeah, when you're
Take
presented with
everybody
a
off,
criteria, you have to provide 3 car places or so and so. You have to ask why. Because you're coming into a generation which I hope will be going off cars into really well thought out people movers. You know, there's so many different ways of doing things. We don't need to do trams. You know, many cities are doing trams. Why? But I couldn't get it right, I don't know. But many, many cities are doing trams. Bergen is doing trams. Bergen with all the hills and everything doing trams. Barcelona, many, many cities are doing trams. It's a very efficient way, but we've got to find out how is it the best for the environment. But we're going to get off cars. We've got to get off cars, and we've got to design cities and settlements that people can hop on and off buses conveniently. We're not going to go into motorcycles. Motorcycles in Indonesia is the best way to go. Sitting on the back of a motorcycle, through the traffic, everywhere, and you can get through. A motorcycle taxi costs 3 times the cost of an ordinary taxi, because they can take you spot on. So we've got to start looking at different alternative ways of moving people around and stop being tied to garages, traffic lights, traffic congestion, pollution from the car in front, and all this sort of stuff. We've got to try and get away from that.
Which is why we're handing over to the next generation.
Yeah.
So good luck, everybody. Anything else?
Okay, well thank you so much, and I think you didn't mind us taking it, but I think the sort of density of what you were saying, it might repay the second viewing, so I think that's okay.
You can sit through it twice. Good for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.